Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Unfortunately, the Pittsburgh Steelers took a pretty embarrassing and heartbreaking loss this afternoon to the Cleveland Browns by a final score of 13-6. We do have a full post-game reaction show up on this channel already that we put out earlier this afternoon. If you guys want to check that out, I have my takeaways coming out of that game, but just want to get in front of a camera again here because I got more thoughts that I want to share with you guys here now that I've done a little bit of research. I've had the opportunity to watch the game over again. And of course, I'm going to be diving into the All-22 film tomorrow and be giving my takeaways on that tomorrow evening. But just some stuff to take away here as unfortunately we're going to bed pretty unhappy here this evening. But before we get into my updated thoughts here, make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. I greatly appreciate all of your guys' support. We added a ton of subscribers today. Over 100,000 people tuned in to today's watch party on Steelers Talk, and I'm guessing tomorrow might be, or not tomorrow, next week against the Ravens might be our biggest watch party of the entire year because it's essentially like a playoff game. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. We're going to have extensive Ravens week coverage for you guys, 2 videos a day, getting you guys ready for what is essentially an early playoff game for the Pittsburgh Steelers next week. Likely on Sunday Night Football, but it could be Saturday Night Football as well. We'll see where they place us, but my guess is just given the nature of the rivalry between the Steelers and Ravens, they'll probably put us on Sunday Night Football next week. But we'll start here with my thoughts here on this stat that, in my opinion, makes this game and this loss 100 times worse. And it was a stat that's been circulated on Steelers Twitter all throughout the afternoon after the game is over, which is that Mike Tomlin has either lost or tied the last 5 games that he's coached versus a team that is 8 games below 500 or worse. All right, and this goes back to the 2020 season. Of course, they lost multiple games to 2023. You guys remember that stretch where they lost to the Patriots and the Cardinals, who were really down bad at that point in the season. They lost to the Browns last year. They lost to the Browns this year. It's just not been a good situation for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And honestly, this has become this type of loss where you're losing to a bad football team. Like, not just like an average football team that's like 500 or slightly below 500. You lost to a 3-12 football team today, and you only scored 6 points against that group today. This is becoming a part of who Mike Tomlin is. And really, it has been a part of who Mike Tomlin is as a head coach, where the style of coaching that he has, it allows you to win some games that maybe you're not supposed to win, like against Detroit last week, and keep you in ball games against teams that might be better than you, but it also keeps teams that are worse than you in the game as well. And it's not Mike Tomlin's fault that DK Metcalf got suspended. It's not Mike Tomlin's fault that Aaron Rodgers made some really boneheaded decisions in terms of the play calling today. And yes, Aaron Rodgers has a big part in the play calling because the way that the offense works is a lot of times they have multiple plays in the huddle. Rodgers can pick between either one of those plays, or they've got a bunch of dead call audibles where they can just change the play to anything Rodgers wants at any time. So Rodgers has full control of the offense, and some of the decisions that he made with the ball today in terms of the plays that they ran, in terms of where he went with the football, especially at the end of the game, throwing 3 straight times the MVS. 2020 hindsight, Monday morning quarterbacking, whatever you guys want to call it, just wasn't a good look. And Mike Tomlin, doesn't necessarily bear all the blame for that. But, obviously when this is becoming a trend, when you are playing really bad football teams and consistently you are losing and not getting those games that you should be able to win, that is something that is an issue with Mike Tomlin. Now, later in the show, I'm going to be talking about, his future with the team and, what next week could mean for his future. We'll get to that later in the show. But another stat that I want to bring to your guys' attention is that the Steelers wide receiver core today, all right, so not tight ends, not running backs, just the receivers, had 21 targets today. You want to guess how many catches they had? They had 8 catches. That is 38% of the targets thrown to wide receivers being caught. That is unacceptable, a 38% completion percentage. And it just goes to show you how important DK Metcalf is, not only because of the value he brings to the team, but also to the value he brings in terms of opening up opportunities for other people. Because, there was nobody open for the Pittsburgh Steelers today. And there's really nobody that could consistently get open against man. And, it's another reason why I don't put all the blame on Rodgers in this game. But, like, when you don't have your number one receiver out there and there's not that much else to work with, you've got two guys out there in Thielen and MVS that were on the couch a couple weeks ago. And then you're working with guys like Roman Wilson and Scotty Miller, two guys that have certainly not played phenomenally this year. It's just not a whole lot in the wide receiver room for you to work with as a quarterback or as an offensive play caller. And this team desperately misses their number one wide receiver, as was predictable. I mean, what did we say all season long? This team needs to get a number two receiver, because if we don't get one, then when DK Metcalf eventually gets injured, or in this case suspended, you're not going to have anything. And your pass game's going to get completely shut down. And that's exactly what we saw today from the wide receiver position. In fact, Pat Freiermuth today outgained the entire Steelers wide receiver room today. He had 63 yards, and he was actually really good. Rodgers threw some beautiful balls to him over the middle of the field in the seams, and he was a big reason why the Steelers even had a chance to tie the game at the end there. He ends up with 63 yards. The entire Steelers wide receiver core, MVS, Thielen, Roman, Scotty, everybody ended with 60 total yards. That's just crazy to me. And it also tells me that Pat Freiermuth, especially now that Darnell Washington is out with a fractured forearm, Muth has to be a huge part of the passing game plan next week. He has to be a big part of this offense down the stretch if they want any chance of winning this season finale against the Baltimore Ravens. And speaking of that game, guys, I can't say that I have a ton of confidence going into that game. But I'll say this right now, man. If they're going to win next week, they're going to have to get the run game going. And this is one of the things that, coming out of my second watch of the game, that I was really frustrated with. Like, Jaylen Warren had a really good day today on the ground. Like, he was very efficient. They just didn't give him a lot of carries. He only had, I think, 12 carries in this game. That's not enough for somebody that was having that good of a game when you're missing not one, but two of arguably your most important pass catchers on the entire team in DK Metcalf and Darnell Washington. If your running back in the run game is working, run the football more. All right. And, for me, the blame for that goes on Aaron Rodgers, because usually they have a pass play option and they have a run play option in the huddle. And it's up to Aaron to decide, am I passing in this situation or am I handing the ball off? And I think there should have been more of a focus on getting the ball to Jaylen Warren, which has been a theme all season, that they don't get this guy the ball enough. And that was certainly the case today. That cannot be the case next week against Baltimore, because I think we saw what this receiving, core of weapons is capable of doing when DK and Darnell are out, which isn't much. So if you have the run game going next week, like you had it going today against Cleveland, if you have that run game going against Baltimore next week, you have to ride it as much as you possibly can. The best thing about this Steelers offense, and really the best thing it's been all season long, has been the running back duo. Got to make sure Jalen and Kenny get plenty of touches and plenty of opportunities next week, because it might mean your season. So it feels like those two have to be a big part of the game plan versus Baltimore next week. And then also Pat Freiermuth has to have a big part in the game plan as well. He's been one of your better receiving targets, period, this entire season. And, I'm all for playing Darnell Washington as much as you play him. But obviously Muth's opportunities have shrunk with Darnell's role increasing, and then the addition of Jonnu Smith. It hasn't been, Muth hasn't gotten the most opportunities, let's say, this year. But now with Darnell likely missing the rest of the season with a fractured forearm, that should give Pat Freiermuth a lot more opportunities here to show what he can do. And he's got to be a big piece of this receiving game in this upcoming week, and then hopefully in the playoffs as well, if the Steelers are going to have success, in my opinion, on offense. And right now we're looking at this situation where we're going up against the Ravens next week without Darnell Washington, without DK Metcalf, coming off a week here where the Ravens scored 41 points and ran for over 300 yards as a team, and the Steelers are coming off a game where they could barely complete a pass down the field. I think there was only one completed pass of more than 15 air yards in this game from Aaron Rodgers, and there was only 3 that were above 10 air yards, and 2 of them came in the final drive. So there's just no ability to throw the ball down the field from the Pittsburgh Steelers without DK Metcalf on the field. And that allows defenses to play very aggressively and stop the run and take away the screen game and the underneath stuff. And, if you don't have anybody that can reliably stretch the field for you, it could be really tough sledding for Pittsburgh on Sunday night, which I'm guessing it'll be Sunday night. But right now, I'd say this. It's kind of weird to say this, but I have more confidence in the Steelers winning a playoff game if they find a way to win next week than I have confidence in them winning in next week's game. Just because of the DK Metcalf factor. When DK's out there, there's actually a threat to go, down the field, etc. When he's not out there, there just simply isn't, and it allows these defenses to play super aggressively and just man up these wide receivers that can't get open or very rarely get open or Rodgers doesn't trust fully. And if you make the playoffs somehow, at least you'd have Metcalf for that game, and you could work in Freiermuth, and with Metcalf out there, that might open up some opportunities for Thielen, like it did last week in Detroit. Maybe they'll open up some opportunities for some other people as well, and Jalen Warren and Kenny Gainwell out of the backfield. But next week versus the Ravens, unless you have the run game going big time, and by the way, you only had 34 yards rushing against Baltimore the last time you played them. I just don't know where the offense is going to come from unless there's a big turnaround from the wide receiver room next week. If MVS all of a sudden becomes a good player, if Adam Thielen all of a sudden makes a big impact without DK Metcalf out there on the field, if they start using Pat Freiermuth outside of a 2-minute drill situation, I just don't know if that's going to be something that we see from the Steelers next Sunday or Saturday night, whenever they end up playing. But if there is any silver lining to today, guys, it's that the Buffalo Bills are no longer in the number 5 spot in the AFC playoff picture. They're now moving down, I believe, to either, I can't remember if it's the 6 or 7 seed, but now Houston has full control of the 5 seed in the AFC. The Bills lost to the Philadelphia Eagles in kind of dramatic fashion. They drove down late in the game to tie the game, and then they had a 2-point conversion, and then Josh Allen just completely misses a wide open receiver in the end zone. Brutal way to lose for Buffalo, but now that means Houston, a warm weather team with a quarterback in C.J. Stroud that has really struggled in cold weather in his career, is now slated to play the AFC North champion in Week 1 if Houston can beat the rival Indianapolis Colts on their home turf in Week 18, which I think they will. The Colts have lost every game since signing Phillip Rivers, so my guess is Houston will play their starters next week to secure the 5 seed. My guess is they will win versus the Indianapolis Colts. If they do so, they will have the number 5 seed. Now, if the Steelers can find some way, somehow, to beat the Baltimore Ravens next week, that means that I actually think the Steelers would have a pretty decent chance of beating Houston. You'd be getting DK Metcalf back. Hopefully they finally figured out that Pat Freiermuth needs to be a big part of this passing attack. You still have Jalen Warren and Kenny Gainwell. We know that this team is capable of playing pretty well in the cold. We've seen them do it multiple times at this point in the year. Defense is playing pretty darn well as well. And I know people talk about Houston's defense and how good it is, and I get that. All right, it is a really good defense. All right, and I think that'd be a pretty low-scoring game if we play Houston in the first round. But I would take playing against a warm weather team with a warm weather quarterback in Pittsburgh in the first round of the playoffs, as opposed to Buffalo, a cold weather team that's already come to our stadium and stomped on us with an MVP caliber quarterback. I would rather play the Houston Texans in the first week of the playoffs. But obviously, first step is to get there. And as I just mentioned, I don't have a ton of confidence that this Steelers team is going to win next week. They're going to have to get creative in terms of their run game. They're going to have to find creative ways to get Jalen Warren and Kenny Gainwell involved in the passing game. They're going to have to get Pat Freiermuth very involved in the pass game. He has to maybe be the number 1 receiver on the team again next week. And then you have to find some contributions from Adam Thielen, MVS, Roman Wilson, Scotty Miller. Somebody needs to step up in some capacity next week in the wide receiver room in order to win, because that Ravens offense is coming off one of their best performances of the year, and they're getting probably Lamar Jackson back next week. Now, the Steelers are getting TJ Watt back, but how good is he really going to be coming off of that partially collapsed lung? We don't know the answers to those questions. So right now, if I had to put a % chance on the Steelers winning next week in Pittsburgh versus Baltimore, I'd probably put it for a home game. This is really low, but like 30%, maybe even lower than that. I'm sure coming off this loss, if you're watching this right now, you're probably feeling, Jack, that sounds like it's too high. But like 30% is not a high chance to win at all in my mind, especially in a home game. So, the DK Metcalf suspension is really coming back to bite us, guys. And frankly, if the Steelers lose this upcoming week versus Baltimore, that's going to be the defining image of the season. This entire season will be defined by DK Metcalf taking that swipe at a Detroit Lions fan, and that's gonna be all she wrote, essentially, because you were streaking towards the playoffs. I think you probably win the game today if you have DK Metcalf on the field. So if you lose these last two games, I think a big reason why you lose these last two games is because DK Metcalf unfortunately made a really bad judgment call there and took that swipe at that Lions fan, which would really, really suck if that ends up being the case. And if that's the case, there's a lot of people on Steelers Twitter saying we need to fire Mike Tomlin, or that he needs to go, and that his job should be on the line next week versus Baltimore. And listen, I understand why people say that. It just feels like we have to watch the same movie every single year here in Pittsburgh, where you're going either 9-8 or 10-7. It's a disappointing end to the season, no playoff wins, and it seems like at this point we're not even going to make the playoffs. If what we expect to happen next week happens and we lose to the Baltimore Ravens. But in terms of the stakes of this game, I think the stakes certainly are high in terms of public opinion. Like, if we lose next week, the fan base is going to be done with Tomlin, all right? And I can't really blame them for being done with Tomlin, all right? I will, to some degree, want to move on from Mike Tomlin, okay? Because if you trade him this offseason, you could still get a haul for him. Like, you could still easily get a first-round pick, probably more, to trade him away. And you could bring in a younger, fresher voice to be the new head coach. You could bring in a younger quarterback, let Aaron Rodgers go off into retirement, whatever. And that doesn't seem like such a bad plan at this point to me. But in terms of how the Steelers are going to approach this situation, the quote-unquote stable Steelers that never make any moves, quote-unquote drastic moves at the head coaching position, most likely what's going to happen next year, and Steelers fans aren't going to want to hear this, but this is what I think is most likely going to happen because of the DK Metcalf situation, because of the Darnell Washington injury situation now, and all this different stuff. If they lose this game against Baltimore, they're going to chalk it up to the suspension. They're going to say we were 9-6 before the suspension happened. Aaron Rodgers was playing good football. This defense was playing better towards the end of the year. And not only do I think they bring back Mike Tomlin, but I think they probably accept his option, which would lock him in for the 2027 season, at least on his contract. I think they might even bring back Terrell Austin, the defensive coordinator, because the defense has turned around over the last month. And, I think Tomlin's thinking is, I don't want to get rid of the defensive coordinator for when the defense is playing this well. I think Arthur Smith will be back. I think Aaron Rodgers, if he wants to come back, I think the team will take him back for another season. And I think for the most part, most of the veterans on this team are going to be back next season. I think for the most part, the best case or the most likely scenario is next year's Steelers team looks a lot similar to the way it was built this year. I think Watt will be back. Highsmith, we'll see about him, but I think he'll be back. Herbig will be back. Queen will be back. Ramsey will be back. JPJ will be back. Deshaun Elliott will be back next year. Eccles will be back next year. I'm guessing they'll bring back Kenny G. They'll still have Jalen Warren. DK Metcalf will be back. A lot of the same tight ends will be back. Most of the offensive line will be back. For me, guys, I think next year there's obviously going to be some changes. You've got 12 draft picks to fill this team up with young talent, and there's some interesting possibilities that go along with that. But I still think at this point, it's so easy for the Steelers team to just chalk up this late season collapse to, we were without our number one receiver. Let's just go get him, a running mate, a legit number two receiver in like Mekhi Lemon or Denzel Boston or one of these top receivers in the draft next year, pair him up with DK, and then we're set, all right? And that'll be their thinking. And, I can kind of see where they're coming from with that, because this team was 9-6 before losing DK Metcalf, but it's also their own fault that they didn't get a legitimate number two receiver to pair with him this year. So at the end of the day, man, I really don't think it's that bad of an idea to think about trading Mike Tomlin, especially if they lose next week, especially if you can get a first-round pick or more. And I would love to get a younger quarterback in here, but, especially if they win next week. But even if they don't, I still think the most likely scenario is that Tomlin will be back, Rodgers will be back, Art will be back, Austin will be back. Pretty much all the veterans on this team will be back, and they're going to run it back for one more season. for Aaron Rodgers and Cam Hayward's final season in the NFL. That's probably what I think is going to happen, guys, no matter what happens in Week 18. But I will say this: if this team loses to the Ravens next week, and that's what I'm expecting at this point, I hope I'm wrong. I really, really hope I'm wrong. But if I'm right and the Ravens win next week, it's going to be a real disappointing end to this season because, just 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago, we were feeling really good about this team coming off of 3 straight wins, all this different stuff. But we knew with the DK Metcalf suspension that this had a chance to bite us in the ass, and it certainly did this week, and we'll see what happens next week. So that's all the thoughts I have for you guys today. I know I kind of rambled a little bit here. It's over 20 minutes already on this at-home video, but lots to talk about here surrounding this football team, and it's going to be interesting and a very fascinating Week 18 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to be covering it every step of the way. Injury updates all throughout the week. Will Lamar Jackson play, or will we get Tyler Huntley? We'll let you guys know the updates on that as the week goes on. We're going to be discussing everything surrounding this week's game, guys. So it's going to be a lot of fun here on the channel this week. 2 live shows, getting you guys ready for probably Sunday night's watch party. We'll get confirmation as to when the game is by tomorrow. We'll make sure to get you guys a morning video out tomorrow as well. And then, of course, my film takeaways in the evening tomorrow. So really do appreciate all of your guys' support. If you watched the watch party today, thank you guys for spending your Week 17 with us here on Steelers Talk. And until tomorrow morning, guys, here we go, Steelers.